Hey, folks, welcome to the Profitable Sheep and Goat Production Podcast, where sheep and goat production is not just our hobby, it's our bread and butter. Hey, good day, folks. It's Leon with Lost Creek Wholesale.
And I'm Matt from GlenBrook Farm.
Today, we want to welcome you again to the Profitable Sheep and Goat Production Podcast. And we would like to look at a subject that our co-host Matt is very passionate about, grazing cover crops and small grains. And we're going to see a bit how Matt does it. And maybe you can get some pointers and find out whether this is something you can incorporate into your program. So take it away, Matt. Tell us how you do it.
As we touched on briefly in some of the other episodes, grazing cover crops is something I do. Again, same as the last episode, this is something I'm pretty passionate about. And I think, especially for our immediate area here, but I think all over the US where we have crop ground, grazing cover crops could be a huge benefit to the sheep industry and goat industry. As I was thinking about this topic the other day, I was wondering, is there people out there grazing cover crops with goats? I mean, you don't really hear about it. I know there's quite a few people that do with sheep, but there's no reason you couldn't do it with goats, right?
If you can keep them in.
Yeah.
Hey, if you're out there and you're grazing cover crops with goats and temporary fence, we want to hear about it.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Send us a message or give us a call.
Yep, for sure. I think that's, that would be very intriguing. And I feel like you could keep goats in. You might need to add another strand of polywire to what we're doing and keep it hot enough, but we'd definitely like to hear it if you're doing that. I'm also a crop farmer, and we raise corn, soybeans, hay, barley, most of it for the sheep, but also some to sell as a cash crop. And I work as a crop scout, so I really get into the crop side of farming too, and passionate about using cover crops for some of the benefits to our crop ground. Like anything, there's challenges, but with the sheep side, it's a win-win. I mean, if we can get cover crops out there and extend our grazing season, it's a high quality forage typically. It's a time of year where we would usually be having to put sheep in the barn and feeding them. Instead, we can have them out there grazing cover crops. And it's relatively easy. I don't know, there's a lot of benefits to it. So, I guess I'll just go into a little bit what we do with grazing cover crops. There's a lot of different scenarios that you could do. Different parts of the country are going to have different challenges with getting out cover crops and what type of cover crops they can raise and so forth. And we might get into some of those things that we could do to get cover crops out earlier. So when we started with cover crops, really we started using cover crops before we had sheep. My dad would have put out cereal rye after corn and bean harvest, and then just use it as a cover crop, burn it down early spring and plant right into that. When I started farming, I continued to do that, but we also started utilizing that cereal rye for grazing with the sheep, and kind of went from there. Over the years, we've tried different things. We've added different species in and things like that. So cereal rye is still probably the starting point for everyone, with especially if you're going out after corn or beans. It's usually pretty late in the season, and you don't have a lot of options on cover crops that'll establish and give you some growth yet. Which cereal rye is really great for that. You can plant it here. We can plant it all the way through November yet. Of course, the later planting dates, you won't get any grazing for that fall, but you still have that cover out there. And in the spring, or really in February, usually we got some warmer days, get more sunlight, and that rye cover crop starts greening up and growing. Um, and it's pretty foolproof. I mean, you can put it out there and it's gonna come, and you can graze it off as hard as you want with the sheep. It's gonna come right back. You're not gonna ruin your cover crop. Um, so we do that. So over the years, we have started planting a little shorter season corns so that we can get our cover crop established quicker and get more growth out of it, and hopefully graze the sheep a little longer in the fall. And that's the great thing with cover crops is your how long your grazing season is. So this fall, we we grazed the majority of our ewe flock the whole way through to New Year's. And then, we brought the ewes in that we're going to lamb in end of January, beginning of February. We brought those in and put them on feed first. And then we had a group of ewes that were bred to lamb in May. They stayed out there on cover crops till probably almost the end of July, end of January. And we got a really cold snap, just nasty weather. We still had some cover crops out there to graze, but it just wasn't nice weather for the sheep to be out. So we pulled everyone in at that point. But then about middle of February, we got some nicer weather, so that we put that group of May ewes out, grazing cover crops, and they've been out there ever since. We're at the beginning of March here, and now our cover crops are really greening up and taking off. Um, so with those ewes, they were grazing all summer. Um, Really, we can graze them all year except for we took about a month out, and that's pretty typical for us. If we get the cover crops out there, um, we can graze most of the year. There's usually about a month in the winter time that the weather's just too nasty. I don't know, it's just not nice having sheep out there. Um, we do so like we're still lambing here, but a lot of our ewes lambed end of January, beginning of February. So we are starting to take some of those ewes and their lambs out on cover crops during the day. And then we do bring them in at night just because it's nicer for the lambs. And we have some creep feed and some dry hay in there for the ewes too. So that's great. We get pretty full in the springtime with all our lambs and everything, but we can get some ewes out there on cover crops. It's a huge benefit. Um, yeah, so that's some of the reasons why we like cover crops. Obviously cuts into our feed cost a lot. Getting into some other things besides cereal rye, this year, most of our cover crops were a barley, and then we put some hairy vetch, some clover in with that, which those are great covers if you can get them out early enough. Um, I really like to see some diversity in there if we can get it established. In the past, after if we can go after corn silage harvest, which is usually in beginning to mid-September for us, then we have used ryegrass and hairy vetch clover mix. I don't know. I'm about done with ryegrass. I think it is a great cover. Once you get it established, it can produce a lot of tons of biomass, but it's a pain to work with. It takes a while to get it established. You got to get it out there early enough. And then it's harder to kill off in the springtime, and it really sucks a lot out of your soil. So I don't know. It's ryegrass still, I think, has a place for us, but I'm not as fond of it as I have been in the past.
And is this perennial ryegrass you're talking about?
Perennial
Yeah.
ryegrass, yeah, yeah.
How does that hairy vetch and clover come in? Like how long does it take till you see something in your stand?
Um, Well, if we do, I think we seeded our first hairy vetch clover barley mix this year, probably around beginning of October. And that did pretty good. Like that came in pretty nice. But we did seed some later, maybe towards middle of October, and the hairy vetch and clover is there this spring. I mean, it didn't do a lot of growth last fall, but it's there this spring. It'll give us some diversity in there. It'll give us more. It'll fix some nitrogen for our following corn crop. So I just started kind of putting some of that in there, even if I think it's a little bit too late. And to see, it's been kind of surprising. We tend to get more warmer falls. It's been kind of surprising um, how late we can go with that and still get some establishment.
Do you have a particular cover clover variety you're planting?
I'm not that booked up on the different varieties. I rely on my seed guy for that. I think it's a crimson clover of some sort, but yeah,
Okay.
I'm not. And you could really, there's a lot of different varieties of cover crops, things like that. But yeah, I'm not that booked up on that. Our system's pretty simple. So yeah. I do think so. This was the first year well, no, last year I had done some barley. This is the second year I'm using barley as a cover crop. Um, I like it's much cheaper than cereal rye. It doesn't establish quite as quick. The other thing I like about it in the spring, cereal rye really gets away from you quick. It grows so fast. And then we like to plant our corn green. So that cereal rye, even with the sheep out there grazing, once that stuff takes off, it kind of gets away from us, and it gets a little harder to plant into it if it's too tall. Um, the downside is, so I think where we'll use cereal rye in the future is if it's way late, where that's our only option, we'll use it. But otherwise, we'll use probably barley or maybe triticale, which triticale, if you're familiar with it, is a cross between a wheat and a um, cereal rye. So I think triticale might be a good option for us. I like barley. I'm a big fan of barley for grain, which I know is not very common in the U.S., but it's kind of making a comeback. Um, but it's a little more, it's not as good of a nitrogen scavenger as the cereal rye is. So, yeah, so I think we'll try some triticale and see how that goes with that. But yeah, that kind of covers that. Um so then we'll graze it as long into the fall as there's decent coverage there, there's decent residual there for them to graze off. And then in the springtime, once it greens up and starts growing, we get sheep out there again, and it takes off and gets ahead of the sheep eventually anyway. So we get them out there pretty quick in the spring. And I have even another benefit to this is in the past I've um, had a cornfield where we didn't take the corn fodder off, which we typically take most of our corn fodder off for bedding. But in a cornfield where we didn't take the corn fodder off, we seeded cereal rye right into there, and then we we graze those stubbles as well as the little bit of rye that was there. So they got some benefits from eating the corn fodder, picking up the extra corn out there and things like that. The other thing, they really trampled that corn fodder down, which helped it break down faster. So like next spring, we didn't have to deal with a lot of residual there because the sheep had trampled it into the ground more, and it started that process of it breaking down. So that was a advantage to us.
That's interesting. I mean, I can see that hoof action, it's not just going to get it knocked down, but it's going to help incorporate it and help get that biological activity going
Yeah,
on to help break it down.
yeah, yeah. And it was surprising. I mean, that was pretty late that we had put that rye out, so it didn't come through much. But I knew I never killed rye by even overgrazing it early on. So I grazed it that fall yet, mainly because I wanted them to get out there, pick up that extra corn that's out there and eat some of that corn fodder. Boy, that was a 10-acre field and we had 50, 60 ewes on there for, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. And they were getting some rye, but there wasn't a lot there for them. So we got some good benefit
Almost a month of
out of
feed
that.
out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
So when they're picking up that corn, did you ever have to worry about, acidosis just due to the fact of them getting too much too quick or anything like that?
We had, I think that's something to think about. So we had stripped the field up a little bit where with a temporary fence where we only gave them access to maybe a quarter of the field at first and then move that down so that we don't just run them out there and give them the whole field, because that could be a concern.
Hmm.
With only giving them a little bit of the field first, we didn't have any issues with that. So
Did you put any sodium bicarb out?
we always use sodium bicarb when we're grazing cover crops. Yeah. We just with, often we're going from perennial pastures, maybe that are getting pretty, I don't know, pretty old or not that nutritional in the fall. And then we go right from there to a lush cover crop. So we're really switching it up, or we might be grazing some hay fields after frost, and then go to cover crops, or go from pasture to cover crops and then to the hay fields after frost. So we're switching things up. So we always have sodium bicarb out there for them when we're
Yeah.
grazing cover crops. The other thing, while we're on that subject, is we've found when we're grazing cover crops, especially cereal rye, we found that we're actually low in phosphorus that the sheep are getting. And these are ewes that are heavy bred. They're getting close to lambing, so their phosphorus requirements are a little bit higher. Um, so we started whenever we're grazing cover crops, we'll put dical or monocalcium out, free choice as well, which is basically phosphorus with a little bit of calcium in it as well. And it's a safe product, similar to sodium bicarb. Like there's no downside to putting it out there. You just put them out there. If they need it, they'll take it. If they don't need it, they won't touch it. So sodium bicarb, dical, and the regular sheet mineral are things we always provide when grazing cover crops.
Good. So another thing I thought of with that corn fodder and that rye, if you had a really good stand of rye, that corn fodder would act a little bit as a buffer.
Yeah,
It would take the place of your dry hay, and like that would
yeah,
be that's like the ultimate combination right there.
yeah, yeah. I would agree. And then they got a little bit of grain yet
Right.
to boost everything on top. So yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
This call is sponsored by Lost Creek Wholesale, your universal feeder distributor in US and Canada. Looking for a way to supplement your livestock with ease? Consider a saliva lick feeder. Universal Feeders saliva lick feeders offer the ability to restrict livestock's intake to a preset amount, determined by the adjustment bar depth and width on the feeder. By narrowing the width and depth of the feed in the groove, this gives us the ability to limit the amount of feed that will stick to a sheep, goat, or cow's tongue. Using Universal Feeder's patent-pending easy adjustment system and saliva lick feature, we can limit sheep and goats to less than 1 pound per head per day and cattle to approximately 6 pounds per head per day. We also offer creep gate attachments for both small lambs and kids. Visit our website at www.lostcreekwholesale.com to find a dealer near you or give us a call at 717-310-3641. That's one thing I get a little jealous of you guys, that if I wish till they take corn off up here in my area, it gets so late sometimes, and then it gets covered in snow, and it's either that or it's too wet. And
Yeah. Well, and so while we're on that, one of the things we started looking at is how can we get cover crops out quicker? So we get more grazing out of it quicker in the fall because it does take a little bit time till we get our corn off. and then get cover crop established. We usually kind of have a gap in there where we run out of feed before cover crops get up and going. So we have one of the ways to do that would be interseeding cover crop into standing corn. And there's several different ways to do that. I know some places they'll fly it on, which is not very practical in our area unless you would use a drone, which some guys are doing. But that doesn't seem to be get very consistent results. It seems some years it works, some it doesn't. So this year we did a trial with Penn State where we were interseeding cover crops with a drill that's set up for interseeding 3 rows of covers in between your corn when it's at like I think we go for V5 to V7 stage. So when the corn's, 6, 8 inches tall, we'll go in there with that interseeder and interseed a cover crop into it. And I had wanted to do this for a little while, but I was told it doesn't work well in our area. And so I didn't want to go to the hassle of setting up an interseeder and all that. So when Penn State approached me about they have this interseeder, they'd come out and do it, and we'd do a trial on it. So I was pretty excited about that. And we basically found that it doesn't really work that well, or it didn't for us this year. We had we had a good established cover. It was just where when we came to harvest it, when we came to harvest the corn, there wasn't much cover crop there anymore. And the combine guy said that he could have told me right where the cover, I mean, he could see it obviously, but he could tell me right where the cover is by watching his yield monitor. Where we got high yields, there was no cover there. Where the yields were down, so the plants were probably not going to shut as much. They didn't pull as much out of the soil. So wherever the yields were down, we had a cover growing in there. And I think this year was probably an exception. We were really dry this year. So I think the corn robbed that cover of some moisture. May have been may have been a reason why we saw some failure this year. But that was what other people had been telling me, was that in our area with our high corn yields, I think our corn just grows shut too much, and it's hard to keep that cover crop alive. The corn grows completely shut, and that cover crop just can't survive in that. The rule of thumb that I've heard is if you're raising under 180 bushels of corn, you probably can do pretty good with interseeding cover crops. If you're doing 200 bushels or over of corn, you're probably going to struggle with it. And that's kind of what we see in here, but we want to do more of that and see if we can't figure out how to do that. So that might be something for you guys up there, Leon, is to look into, is interseeding cover crops into standing corn. And I know it's going to be hard to probably convince the farmers that that's worth doing, but yeah, might be an option. The other thing for you guys would be after barley or wheat, rather than putting double crop beans in,
Right.
might be an option.
Something I'd like to try is doing a pearl millet with with like ryegrass or something, or cereal rye sometime.
Yeah, I think we might start doing some after barley instead of putting beans in. We might do some summer annuals and get some summer grazing in, and then come back in the fall and put a cold species in there. But there again, we get a really good bean yield after barley beans. It's going to be a little hard to justify that on the financial end to get enough of cover grazing out of that, but might be something to look at. So, and from your perspective, you don't have any crop ground, so you can't just try things. You'd have to convince a farmer to
Either
do
that or
it.
tear up some of my hay ground, and I'm not ready to do that just yet.
Yeah, yeah. If you would have a farmer in the area that's really into cover crops and the benefits of them, uh, it could be, it would be helpful incentive to him if you can, um, pay him for for grazing those cover crops off for him. It would be an incentive for him to maybe plant some shorter season corn so he can get some cover crops out.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So there's lots of stuff on that side of it, but I mean there's a lot of cover crops out there already that could be grazed off, so be exciting to see more of that happening. And so one big holdback for people with grazing cover crops is obviously you need fencing, and we'll do another episode on temporary fencing and things like that, but we're just using a poly wire when we're out there grazing those cover crops. It doesn't take long to put up, and it works pretty well for us. So one other thing I wanted to talk about was, along with grazing cover crops, we also graze small grains that are staying for grain. For us, it's primarily barley, but it could also easily be done with wheat. Um, and the benefit there, beyond just getting some extra grazing for sheep, is with barley, it's key to get it out early enough to get good establishment, to get good yields. And but the downside is if you put it out too early and you get a warm fall, your barley gets too tall, it gets rained on you, and it can go down and suffocate and things like that. So we've started putting our barley out as early as we can. So whether it's after corn harvest, beginning of September, or after, I should say, silage corn, beginning of September, or if it's more in October, early October is about the latest we like to go, after a shorter season grain, corn. But we'll put the barley out as soon as we can, and then we'll just graze it off with the sheep to maintain that height. And um, typically, I mean, we pretty much graze our barley every year. So if we don't get a lot of growth, we'll wait till after a hard frost till that barley's dormant. We'll go graze that extra top off of it, and that'll actually, as long as we're not too hard on it, that'll help the plant tiller out and be a shorter, sturdier plant in the spring. Um, I haven't done any yield checks or anything like that, to know if it's giving us a benefit or detracting. All I know is in the couple years we've been doing it here, we've been getting good barley yields. And I know out west, Midwest, they do a lot of that on wheat fields with cattle. And there I know they've done some trials where there it showed them, I think 8 to 10, 5 to 10 bushels of yield gain where they grazed it with cattle. Now if you do want the straw, they typically saw a reduction in straw yield, but for us, we do want the straw, and straw is a big deal for us, but I'll take a slight reduction in straw to have barley or wheat that's sturdier and not as likely to go down, and we can still push that yield up. Um, so this fall, we've been grazing barley on our own farm for quite a few years. This fall, we actually grazed barley for some other people in the area here. The one guy, friend of mine, in particular, they they always put their barley out early because they wanted to get a cover in, and they knew they're getting better yields if they can get it out early. So they would always put it out early and then bush hog that extra growth off,
Oh
which
boy.
that's but it worked well for them. It did what they wanted it to do. They got a cover out there early. They always got good yields on their barley by getting it out there early. They had the extra labor and cost of going out there and bush hogging the tops off of it. So we grazed it off this year with the sheep, and I actually paid them to be there with the sheep. It gave me about a month of feeding with 110 ewes. So we paid them some for grazing it off, and they didn't have to go out and bush hog it off. So it was kind of a win-win all around. So I think we'll
So
see some more of that.
next year he's going to pay you for doing it, right? You paid him so he would let you try it, and now
Yeah,
next year he's going to pay you to
to maintain it for him.
right, because otherwise
Yeah,
he's going to have to get the tractor up,
I
the
mean,
time and the
that's
fuel.
true. That is true. You could promote it as a service, I think, but I
Plus he's
think
going to get all the biology being stimulated by the sheep out there with the manure and the trampling and
Mhm. And we did leave like one small, I don't know, maybe 2 acre field that he bush hogged off. So will be able to compare it a little bit and see the difference. And he just took the farm over from his father-in-law. So he wasn't the one doing the bush hogging in the past. And he told me after he bush hogged that 2 acres off, he said, boy, he was glad that that was all he had to do. He said, that's kind of depressing out there doing something. It doesn't seem like there's much value to it. So um, I'm excited to, yeah, see what they think of that. And they're actually looking, they got some sheep themselves. So I think they'll grow their own flock, but they had all this barley this year. So um, yeah. So there it kind of plays into it.
whoops, I believe we lost Matt. Looks like his battery died. Sit tight, he'll be right back.
Yeah, so as I was saying before my computer battery died and cut us off there, is the grazing small grain um for or small grains, barley, wheat, whatever. Um, it's a nice, not only extra grazing and free feed we got, cheap feed we got, whatever, but it's also placed nicely into the whole farm system where we can make sure we get our small grains out early and get them well established and graze them off to maintain and control it. So I think that's an important piece of it. So um, yeah, again, I'm always excited about free, high quality feed, or I should say cheap. It's not exactly free till you fence it and do all that, but yeah, yeah. So I think that covers the cover crop grazing fairly well on my end. There's a lot of things we could go into with different species and things like that. It is a question I get a lot, like what can you graze? And I don't think there's that much that you can't graze. You're probably going to go more with what works well for your crop side and then see if you can utilize it with the sheep.
Right.
So I do think anytime you're trying something new, do your research, look into what potential problems you might have. Just go pull some samples of that forage and send it to a lab to see, what is actually out there and how's that going to affect your use. You might need to supplement, like I had shared earlier about using DiCal. Um, we did not figure that out ahead of time. We learned that the hard way, and I forget. It was when we started grazing rye. I think we did it for 2 years until we realized that I don't remember exactly what some of our issues were, but there were issues around lambing time, which we would have been grazing this just prior to that. And that's where I started looking into rye and realized that we were low in phosphorus. So I think doing some of that research ahead of time, if you're trying something new, would be wise. But yeah.
Yeah, it's all good stuff. So, like Matt had mentioned, we will try to do an episode here coming up in the near future on temporary fencing,
Mhm.
and maybe we'll cover some of what I use as in my rotational grazing and what
Yeah.
Matt uses in his grazing cover crops. So
Mhm.
stay tuned for that one. And if anybody has any questions about grazing cover crops or ideas, like we mentioned before, we have a phone number you can call and you can select option 4 and leave us a message. That phone number is 717-310-3641. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you for sticking with us, and we're enjoying this, and we enjoy talking about sheep and learning more of them, and both of us are excited to get to the part where we start interviewing other shepherds, goat farmers, goat ranchers, industry people, things like that. But
Absolutely. And if you got a suggestion for us on a sheep producer or a goat producer that you think would be a good option to interview, we want to hear about that. So
yeah,
let us know.
or any industry people that you think would be good people to interview. It could be lamb buyers, it could be vets, it could be university people that are doing research. We're anything pertaining to the sheep and goat industry that you think would be interesting to sheep and goat farmers. We would like to hear about it. We have a list of people we would like to interview already, but definitely always open to suggestions, and we'll go from there.
All right. I think that's going to end the discussion on grazing cover crop. Just a quick word from us here at Lost Creek Wholesale and Universal Feeders. We just want to put the plug in that if we are looking for more dealers, if you got a farm supply store near you that you think would be a good place to sell the universal feeders, we'd like to hear about it. Or maybe you yourself would even consider being a dealer. We are keeping our eyes open for more good dealers. So got any leads for us, let us know.
Sounds good.
That wraps it up for today, folks. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Once again, this is the Profitable Sheep and Goat Production Podcast, where it's more than just our hobby, it's our bread and butter. Thanks for listening, folks. Come back and join us as we converse with farmers and ranchers who are leaders in the industry, interview nutritionalists and veterinarians that can answer questions and offer valuable information. Got that sheep or goat question you'd like answers to, or something you'd like to hear discussion on? Give us a call at 717-310-3641. Select the option for Sheep and Goat podcast questions and leave a detailed message. Or send me an email at leon@lostcreekwholesale.net. Thanks, and see you next time. Universal Feeders, feeding your livestock one lick at a time.